So thank you very much for coming, everyone. I am Joe Nash. You can tweet me here. If there's any feedback, abuse, criticism, questions, please do tweet. I do actively try and act on the feedback from my talks, and I do improve them for the next iteration. So please do send that feedback in. And I'm a developer advocate at a company called Braintree. If you haven't heard of us, no, we're not the small town in Essex. Neither do we own Old Street Roundabout. They would be forgiven for thinking that right now. We're in fact a payments processor, and we back some people such as Uber, Airbnb, and Minecraft. So before we get started, I just want to say a big thank you for having me. It's nice to actually do a talk in London as a developer advocate for once. Usually I'm all over the place. I feel a bit out of place not wearing a suit, but they don't fit in backpacks, unfortunately. And as you may have already noticed, I do speak very fast, and I do wave my hands around a lot. So if I do say anything far too quickly, please heckle me. I will slow down and repeat it. This talk is for you. I want you to get maximum value possible. So we're here to talk about tokenization, and we're talking about that in the frame of the payments industry. So we're going to talk about two things related to that. We're talking about payment methods, which have kind of exploded this year, and we're talking about user experience. The last one's particularly important to the payments industry. So before we can do these things, I need to put the payments industry in some kind of context for you. I'm sure you're all vaguely aware of the payments industry, but just in case. So the payments industry is a massively growing space. If we look at PayPal alone, Braintree is a PayPal company, we see that we've had a 25% growth in the amount of payments year on year just between the last 2 years. We've gone up to 1.6 billion payments processed every year. Interesting fact is that 1 in 6 payments that happen online actually are facilitated by PayPal. That's a huge number of payments. You can really see that the space is starting to explode. And when we look at Braintree in particular, which is a payment method agnostic gateway, you can process anything through Braintree, we see that we've increased to 50 billion in authorized payment volume in 2015. And if we look to the bottom figure, which is particularly relevant to tokenization on the topic today, the amount of cards stored on file in Braintree has increased to 154 million, tripling from a year and a quarter before. And if we look at just a year before, between Q1 and Q2, we find there's actually a 14 million difference just between 2 quarters. So it's more than doubled between 2 quarters the number of credit cards stored in the Braintree system. And not only is the online payment space so rapidly growing, but it's growing massively in mobile as well. 27% of online transactions now take place over mobile. It's a hugely important space, which is why so many players are starting to get into that, which is why we see such a huge explosion of payment methods. There's massive fragmentation amongst payment methods now, because fundamentally no one pays the same. And we're not even talking about just the new payment methods when we say this. We're not even talking about the Apple Pays and the Android Pays and the Bitcoin. We're talking about just the fundamentals. If you look at France, for example, 57% of French people do their transactions online via Visa, MasterCard, and Amex. If we compare that to Germany, that's just 9%. Germany are massive into debit. And this is before we get to the Bitcoins, this is before we get to the Android Pay. This space, this is so valuable that we're seeing this explosion in digital wallets. There's been Android Pay, Apple Pay, Samsung Pay rumored. There are so many different pays for a company coming out this year. Pretty much every player is getting into the space because it's so lucrative and because there's so much to be won. And this is great for user choice. Users are rejoicing, they can pay with what they want. As an Android user, I can now pay, well, I can't yet because Google aren't in the UK, but in theory I can. As an Apple user, I can pay with my phone. As a Barclays user, I've got my wristband, whatever. But it's very, very difficult for merchants. Merchants need to support all these payment methods. And I've been hearing things from people in the last couple of days. I was having a chat with some people at an API meetup on Tuesday about payment methods, and they were saying that the most awkward interactions in their day-to-day lives are currently having that awkward moment with merchants where they go to pay with Apple Pay and they're like, oh, I'm sorry, we don't do that. We've all been used to this for centuries, decades. If you used an Amex, you have this problem on a day-to-day basis. And it's a horrible, horrible thing for the merchants, and it's a horrible, horrible thing for the users. And even more so, it's a horrible thing for developers. If you're a developer trying to support all these payment methods, you have to build in so many APIs, it is unreal. No one wants to go through that. As API providers, as people who are building out APIs, we have to think about this. It's fundamentally an issue of user experience. That is a really inconveniently placed line on that monitor there. That's going to ruin every slide, I apologize. So it's fundamentally an issue of user experience. All these this space for competition over payment methods and digital wallets exists because the user experience in e-commerce is so awful. If we had nailed credit card for online payments in the beginning, if we didn't all have these gigantic forms, we wouldn't be where we are now. So the reason all these players are able to move in and take a chunk of this payment space is because there is a user experience battle to be fought. So when we look at user experience, we find some interesting statistics. So the time spent in mobile apps by users has increased by 21% year on year. But the majority of most apps are only opened once. which is an appallingly terrifying fact. If any of you are mobile app developers, be afraid. It's absolutely scary. And it gets no better when we go to web. There's been studies like this one, and this was covered by the BBC last year. The average user spends less than 60 seconds on a site. If you're expecting your user to get through your experience and get to the point of monetization in that time, that's just not going to happen. And it gets no better when we get to apps. When they do open those apps, they're spending less than 103 seconds inside those apps, which is an appallingly terrifying time. But this isn't true for all digital mediums. Almost every single industry that's developing experiences, that's developing commercialization online, has had their battle over how they retain users. And if we look in contrast to one medium that's been very successful, we find video games. If any of you have children or grew up with video games, you'll know that you spend a massive amount of time in them. So what makes video games effective? What is it that makes you lean on the edge of your seat when you're playing a racing game or jump for joy when you win? What is it that makes you do stupid things like this? This is my actual Steam profile. These are my actual figures in games. That Skyrim one of 134 hours was in a period of 2 weeks. I have no regrets. What makes these things happen? Why are these figures for what is fundamentally an app so different from the apps that we use every day on our phones? Why are these such inflated figures? 134 hours versus 103 seconds. That's insane. And the thing that causes that is something called immersion. So when we talk about immersion, obviously we're not talking about immersing someone or something in a liquid. If that's what you're looking for, you're in a very wrong conference. We're talking about deep mental involvement in something. We're talking about constructing a world around our users, somewhere where they feel some connection to the app they're experiencing. They're put into a seamless environment where they are able to move freely within the context of the application, where they're able to do what they want, where it's intuitive. We're telling them a story, and they're falling into that story. For example, we take Uber. Uber tells me a story that I will have effortless cab rides. So I can just get out of my cab at the end of my journey, and everything is handled for me. And that's completely correct. Uber immerses me. I use Uber on a day-to-day basis because I know that I don't have to fight with cash at the end. I know that if my phone runs out of battery in the cab, I don't have an awkward experience. It just pays, and everything is magic. Uber is an immersive app because it tells this story and puts the user in that place. And developers need immersion. Merchants need immersion. If you don't immerse your users, you're not going to get them to the point of sale. You're not going to get to the point where your payment API can be exploited. You're not going to provide them with that magical feeling. So to provide an example of what a typical e-commerce experience and what a typical payments API implementer is doing nowadays, I'm going to turn myself into a user. So I'm going to be buying a teapot. Fun fact, I actually own this exact teapot. Very good teapot. The other teapots are commercially available. And I'm going to do what most users typically do when I want to buy a new teapot. I'm going to go to Google and search for a teapot. And because I'm a lazy user, as most users are, I'm going to click on the top link. And again, being a lazy user, I'm not going to put much effort in. I'm only here for 60 seconds. I'm going to go along the navigation, and I'm just going to go to new arrivals. Great, perfect. And straight away, I see something I like. I really like this thing in the corner there, this beautiful basket weave teapot, $52. And I'm really excited to pay $52 for this. Really excited by that. So I put it in my basket, and at this point, I'm being a good user. I've probably been immersed. I've actually found an item, so I've probably been here for more than 60 seconds at this point. This website has immersed me. I'm ready to pay. I'm super ready to give this website $52 for this. Super ready. So I come to this page. I'm about to click proceed to checkout, and I hit that button, and it all goes wrong. Oh, my word. There are just boxes everywhere, and as a user, I don't know how to deal with this. This has completely shattered my immersion. And the best bit about this page is this isn't all of the forms. If I want to see all of them, I have to zoom out by 70%. What on earth is this experience? My immersion has been completely shattered. I just wanted the shop to shut up and take my money, right? I didn't want to be filling out forms for days. This isn't a passport application. Why am I doing this? And the point here is that immersion is fragile. It doesn't matter how many payment methods you integrate. It doesn't matter what you do. If your UX is awful, your user isn't going to convert. We've killed the magic by doing this massive, horrible form. So we're seeing a couple of problems here in summary. So we're seeing that there's a huge variety of payment methods, and we're seeing that the user experience of payment methods isn't as good as it could be. On top of that, there's also the fundamental problem of security. Online shoppers are just throwing their credit card details around willy-nilly. Like, anyone can have this stuff. Like, casual shops that have got their store running on like a computer on their desk are handling your payment card details. That is an absolutely terrifying possibility. We have a solution to all three of these problems, and that solution is tokenization. So tokenization, on the surface, is a PCI DSS recommended security method. That's a long sentence. And what it is taking all your sensitive information about a payment method, like the card number, like the verification, like the expiration, and sending them off to a tokenization server. You encrypt them. The PCI DSS mandates that you encrypt it between that connection. And then the tokenization server is essentially a giant hash map. It takes the sensitive details, stores them securely, and gives you back this token instead. And a token, this isn't a real token, is just a long string that is seemingly meaningless. And what this means is that our apps, our payment APIs, can transport the payments details or representation of the payment details around the application state without any danger of those being exposed. Because if anyone does compromise their app, all they're going to get is a big meaningless string. So in simple terms, it's taking something we care about and replacing it with something we don't. In practice, it works like this. So this is an example using Braintree, but other tokenization servers do exist. So I'm a merchant, I'm a developer, I have a client, and I have a server. My server, when the user goes to my client, my server sends that client a client token. This tells me that my client is actually being backed by the server I believe it to be backed by. There's no man in the middling going on there. The user then puts in their payment details into my client, and those are sent straight to Braintree. They're encrypted and sent to Braintree, and Braintree then turns that into a token and returns that to the client. The client then posts that, what we call payment method nonce, is a token representing the payment through to the server, and all actions using our users' payment methods, whether that be a subscription, whether that be storing it for later, whether that be billing them straight away, all take place with that payment method token. They don't take place with actual card details. This is especially interesting. As a merchant, as a developer, I have not touched their payment details. They never go through any of my systems. That form is actually rendered through Braintree. It's an iframe. We've solved all the weird iframe problems. Don't worry about that. So they never have even been into my client. They've gone straight through to Braintree. It's secure. There's a lot of PCI burden taken off of the merchant this way. And then when I want to make a payment, I just bring up that token and I build them across. So on the surface, this is a really powerful security method. But when we get onto the other side, when we swim through and go into some depth, we find it has some other really interesting implications. The first one is the user experience. When we have massive, horrible forms like this is easily avoided. We don't need to present this to the user every time. We have techniques like vaulting, where we can take a user's token and we can store it for later. So they've, for example, exactly back to the Uber example. Uber, you've put your payment card details into it. They've put that in their server. It's sitting there safely. When you finish your cab ride, they just go pull out a token for your payment method, and they build that token. You don't have to fill out this credit card form every time. It's saved, it's secure, and most importantly, it's not just sitting around in your app. Your whole card details aren't just sitting around in your Uber app waiting for someone to crack the app and take them out. They're secure, it's all tokened. And then you get one-click experiences. For example, one from the Humble Bundle, you've probably also all seen it in other online shopping experiences, where you've already put your payment details into it and you can tell it to remember you and come back later. This is something we're all very used to, but we're starting to see this deployed on a massive scale now. If we look at technologies like OneTouch, I log into my PayPal app once, and anywhere I go, any app, any website, on that device remembers me, and I can just pay straight away. It's a super easy experience. I don't need to enter my credit card details countless times. Tokenization is total magic for user experience. And then we get to payment methods. And the really interesting thing about tokens, this is a point that I think is absolute, just mind-blowing, is that a token doesn't represent anything, obviously, right? This is an actual token in the background. This isn't the whole token. This goes on for pages. And that doesn't obviously look like a PayPal. I mean, it could be a PayPal. Doesn't look like a PayPal. Doesn't obviously look like an Android Pay. It could be, doesn't have to be. And doesn't look like a Bitcoin. The really interesting thing about tokens is that they have this property of genericity, which isn't a word I've made up. Everyone insists it is, but it is actually a thing. They are perfectly generic. They can represent any payment method we choose them to represent, which means we can offer checkout experiences like this. There is nothing more frustrating as a user than walking into a store and being told I can't pay the payment method I have to pay. Like, there's actually I think it came into the news yesterday, that there's a widespread movement in Australia now to boycott the 1/3 of shops that still only accept cash. I'm 100% behind that movement. That is amazing. And as we don't have to present online, we can get around this problem really easily. We have tokenization. We can easily provide checkout experiences that not only are very small and UX nice, like this one that only asks for card number and expiration date, but we can ask for PayPal, we can ask for Coinbase, we can ask for whatever crazy payment method Germany uses. We can do those things. Tokenization is total magic. And this is awesome for merchants, and it's awesome for customers, but there's one more bit which we haven't quite covered, and being API days, this is the most important bit for me. And that's that tokens, being generic, they are very, very easy for new payment methods. When new payment methods come out, which let's face it, at this point, they inevitably will, there's probably one being released like as I'm speaking, we don't have to put in any new code. If we look at this example of some code here, this is an actual piece for API. we've got two parameters in this sale request. We're just doing we've got a transaction, we're turning that into a sale through our payment gateway. There are two parameters we need, the amount, which I've very magically put in as $20, and the payment method nonce. There's some things missing from this. There is no logic to handle whether this is a credit card or a debit card. There's no logic to handle whether this is PayPal or any of this stuff. We don't have to do any area conditions on whether any of these individual methods aren't handled properly. All of those payment methods, everything that Braintree accepts, which is credit, debit, PayPal, Bitcoin, Apple Pay, Android Pay, ELV in Germany, a load of other stuff in other countries, they're all handled by that one payment method nonce. I hope I've convinced you that tokenization is magic. I spoke very quickly, apparently. Thank you. I've been Joe Nash. Any questions? Go for it. I've spoken so quickly that Mehdi's not even in the room. Amazing. Cool. Go for it. I'll repeat the question. Let's go.
Can you give me a sense of this tokenization solution? How does that comply with PSD2 in the context of strong customer authentication for e-commerce payments?
OK, so that's a very good question. I'm not entirely sure the answer. So it's mandated, as far as I know, within that standard. Yeah, sorry, yeah. So the question was, how does tokenization comply with PSD2 in the terms of strong user authentication and security? So I think the standard there is the same as the one I mentioned, where basically the recommendation is as long as you're encrypting the payment details when you send them to the tokenization server, that's the dangerous bit in this. So when you have the token amongst the application state, there's no risk there at all because the token is not actually representing anything, right? The dangerous part is the encryption to get it to the tokenization in the first place, the tokenization server in the first place. So that will be the bit that it goes into details on. And that varies depending on which API and payment API you're using, obviously, their implementation of it. I'm not entirely sure on which encryption standard we're using, but I would very much hope it's PCI compliant.
So it felt like that it's before the encryption, there's a bit that is very critical, which is actually, how do you know that this is the customer who's actually making that request to release the token to send?
Oh, I see what you mean. OK, yeah.
Strong customer authentication bit.
Yes, so for example, let's take OneTouch. So with OneTouch, you log into the PayPal app, and then you get a device-wide cookie. So if I've logged into PayPal OneTouch, and then I go to a store that accepts PayPal, and I authorize a transaction, that's what you're concerned about, right? Cool. So basically, because it's a device-wide cookie, we assume that I would imagine that security is dealt with on the device. So if I've authorized on that device, that's a very good question. I'm not sure why that's compliant. Especially in light of iOS 9 and being able to unlock it. Interesting question. I'm going to find out the answer to that. This is why I love questions I can't answer. Cool. Any others? No? OK. Cool. Wonderful. Thank you, everyone. Sorry I finished so early.